people like this have access to guns. People get scared when things like this happen, and then they have this knee-jerk reaction where they want to take all the guns away.
It's a human right to defend yourself. And I think that's where the Second Amendment comes from. If I'm not hurting anybody, I have no intent of harming anybody. Why shouldn't I have a machine gun or a tank or, you know, some kind of missile or something if I'm just doing it for fun and I'm not hurting anybody?
Not everybody should vote. Like, there's, in my opinion, you should only vote if you've done your research.
The fact that a firearm is designed to kill is its defining feature. That doesn't mean that it's intended to kill, but the power to kill is what makes it able to defend. Okay, welcome to another kitchen sink microscopy. Today, let's see, what sort of subject shall we discuss today?
Well, something quite horrific popped up in the news overnight. In New Zealand, there was a mass shooting at a mosque. And
two mosques, actually.
Yeah, two mosques, you're right. And it was a white supremacist group. They had a manifesto. They even called themselves fascists, and they praised Trump and I think the NRA. Like, they were basically using the US and their gun laws as a scapegoat to say, like, this is why we do what we do. And that's kind of the gist I got from it. So I thought, you know, it'd be a good topic to go into the Second Amendment and how things have changed over 200 plus years, and just the climate of gun control laws right now and the future.
Okay, yeah, well, that's a pretty big subject. I don't think we're going to get to it in this short amount of time. Yeah, that is a really
seconds
terrible
per topic.
Yeah. That's a really terrible situation. I think there's a lot of information we don't know about it yet. There's information still unfolding, but it certainly does make one think.
Well, there's more elements than just guns involved in this. There's, you know, religion, there's politics. It's a mess.
Yeah.
Good things.
Absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, you know, so yeah, let's go into the topic of gun ownership and gun control. Maybe just scratch the surface in the way that we can.
Yeah.
Where would you like to begin on that?
Well, I guess if we're using that as the kickoff, I suppose it would be a good idea to talk about, you know, the safety issue. Like, people like this have access to guns. People get scared when things like this happen, and then they have this knee-jerk reaction where they want to take all the guns away. You know, like, I don't land on any particular far end of that spectrum. Sort of in the middle. Maybe I lean one way more than the other, but I definitely think there's a whole lot to talk about there on either side.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is a huge topic, and we will definitely have to revisit it. I think, you know, the thing is, though mass shootings are very rare, exceptionally rare, they're so dramatic that it gets people really emotional, you know, because it's such a terrible thing.
Yeah.
And then they want to, there's a call for action, things like that. And well, that's a whole different topic. Maybe we can explore that at some point, specifically that specific topic of mass shootings.
Yeah.
But well, let's talk about uh, why don't we talk about just gun ownership in general? The firearms ownership, and we can focus on the United States since we both live there.
Yeah.
I know a little bit about other countries' gun laws and their history, but not enough to speak as an authority. So,
Yeah, it's a good starting point, I guess.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, I'll just start off. My personal view on gun ownership um, comes from the principle of self-ownership. So you're an individual, you own yourself, you're responsible for yourself, and you're also, by extension, responsible for your own self-defense. And I consider it a human right. Um, and you can't really rely on the police to defend you. You could certainly expect them to help, but they're the second line of defense. So you are, and
Sometimes that's
well,
a problem.
yeah, we all know how that ends up. So I mean, in fact, the police could be your worst enemy if you call for
Yeah.
help in some situations, depending on who you are, which might be its own topic.
Yeah.
Um,
They're kind of an organized crime thing, I think. But
yeah, they're certainly not all bad. I know police officers, and there's a lot of really good ones out there, but the bad ones make everybody look bad.
yeah,
So,
and it's like this brotherhood thing, like if
mhm.
anyway, yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
episode.
let's reserve that. Write that down. We'll have to come back to that one. Um, so I I think that is really where I'm coming from, and that you have to. It's a human right to defend yourself, and I think that's where the Second Amendment comes from, as far as the origins of it. Obviously, the time it was written, we had just gotten through fighting the Revolutionary War. There was a lot of concern about overbearing governments and state control of people and being able to defend against that. And I think that's actually really at the core of the Second Amendment, the ability to defend yourself against your own government, which I think is kind of lost today because we live in a fairly safe world where that kind of thing really, at least in the first world, doesn't happen. So I don't think people think that it can. And so we've sort of walked away from that kind of concern. But though society may have changed and technology has changed, people haven't changed. And the, the entire Constitution, including the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment, was written because of people. It's based on those people's understanding of human nature, and so I think that's sort of the origin of the Second Amendment is the ability to defend yourself against the state, your government, or whoever is around you, that kind of thing. Personal self-defense or defense of others. Securing food is obviously, at least at the time, was a really important thing. There was like a McDonald's you could go down to, so people hunted all the time, and I think even today it's still a thing, although nobody really has to hunt to survive, at least in the United States. But it's
Yeah.
still a very much enjoyed sport, and I think it's supported even in people by people who don't really agree with gun ownership. They're still, to some extent, supportive of sporting, hunting, that aspect of
Yeah.
it.
I think the biggest hang up with it is, when it comes to self-defense, there's almost like this ceiling of gun ability that makes any rational sense for that argument. It's like the right to bear arms in the environment of the 1770s was more like, here's the technology we have. It's basically like you aim at one person, you take a shot, you reload, that sort of thing. defending yourself against one particular target at a time. I don't think it was envisioned whatsoever that one person would be given such a heavy advantage with one particular weapon to be able to mow down people, like tens, hundreds of people, depending on the situation and your aim,
yeah.
in a matter of seconds.
Well,
that's there's an argument to be made for that in wartime, but when it comes to personal self-defense, there's little to no possibility that you're going to be ganged up on by 40 people and you need a machine gun.
Well, and that's
you would
the
just
thing.
Have one.
Machine guns are well, and machine guns are heavily restricted since 1934, I think it was, with the Gun Control Act, I believe it was. So you pretty much you really, most people don't have machine guns, and there's some argument that,
right?
Huh?
It's an easy modification from a semi-automatic, isn't
it? Depending, it can be. Well, in fact, you could build a machine gun from Home Depot parts for super cheap if you wanted to. But that aside,
that's a how-to video for later.
yeah, exactly. Nah, we're not getting flagged on this one. The thing is, machine guns aren't necessarily good for killing a lot of people. It's actually there's a reason why real assault rifles, not the so-called assault weapons, the reason why real assault rifles have select fire. You have fully automatic. That's generally used to force an enemy to take cover, not necessarily to kill. It's not like, some kind of Rambo movie or Arnold Schwarzenegger, where you're like, shooting, every shot hits perfectly squarely and people go flying through windows and stuff. It doesn't work like that. It's mostly just to keep people down, and then you use your semi-auto mode for increased accuracy. So I wouldn't say that full auto is any more dangerous, but it's scary, so it freaks people out and they get worried about it. But
well, just the potential it has. The guy that shot up Vegas a couple of years ago or whatever, I do believe that was an automatic weapon. And
no, it was. So presumably, and I haven't seen all of the reports on this, but presumably he had what's called a bump stock. He had several rifles that had bump stocks attached, and what that is, it's the stock of the rifle is sort of loose, so you can pull it close to you and it kind of bounces. So it bounces your finger against the trigger, creating a pseudo fully automatic situation. If you ever seen videos of it, it's kind of wild. It doesn't work the same way as a real full auto gun. But he had those, and so it created kind of a pseudo full auto fire. The thing is, you don't even need bump stocks to do that. You could just do that with some skill and practice too.
Yeah, well, ultimately, I don't see any major difference between semi-auto and auto, because semi-auto, as fast as you can pull the trigger, is how fast the bullets are going to come flying out. It's almost no different from a full auto if you're rapid firing. So it's a little bit of a moot point to say, well, semi-autos are fine. Yeah, fully automatic is just a little bit over the line, when really they're like very similar, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, in a way, it does take a lot more skill to fire quickly. And yeah, I guess you could say, because full auto doesn't necessarily have the same level of accuracy as semi-auto. Semi-auto could potentially be more dangerous. Mm-hmm. But a double action revolver is semi-automatic. And in fact, I've seen some pretty skilled revolver shooters single action. That is, you have to cock the hammer back every time, fire essentially at full auto speeds with a revolver, which is crazy. So it's not really the tool. Regardless of whatever capacity somebody has, I don't know that anything is necessarily more dangerous than another or deadly. It's all in the user. And honestly, given the fact that if you think about this, there are more guns in this country than there are people. If guns were really the problem, we'd all be dead right now.
Yeah, I will agree that it's definitely the user, not the tool. But that kind of segues into another aspect of this, and that's the self-ownership that you had mentioned. There might be certain people that just can't handle that particular right, if you will. I don't know. I kind of think that it's an arbitrarily assigned right. I don't think it's like a natural born right necessarily. But
why would you say that?
Defense is, but the Second Amendment doesn't even talk about self-defense. It says right to bear arms and things like that.
Actually,
very specific about weaponry.
Let's look at the text of the Second Amendment, because I as luck would have it, I just copied and pasted that. So let's see. Here we go. Okay, we're gonna look at this. All right, there. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what the Second Amendment says. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, there's a huge amount of debate about what this actually means. And I think a lot of it comes down to changes in terminology, because the term regulated has changed, or at least in this sense, it means something different than what most people think. Most people think when they hear regulation, they think government regulation. But in this case, it actually means to be well trained is what they're referring to. If you read some of the texts written by the people who created the Constitution and the amendments, it's pretty clear that's what they meant. The other section is the militia, which has people go into the idea that the militia is the military. Well, the founding fathers, I guess if you can call them that, were very, very leery of a standing army because of what they'd just gone through. There's a huge problem. So the militia, in this case, is referring actually to all people. Every citizen is considered a part of the militia, and the idea was they would act as a kind of check against the government overreach.
Okay, so if the people as a whole are still to be considered a militia, where everyone has their right to keep and bear arms in order to secure a free state, what are we doing to cover that regulated bit? Like, how are we training them when everyone freaks out if we want background checks?
Yes. No, I totally agree. And honestly, like that's a huge problem. We don't really, there isn't any kind of real training. And background checks actually are probably one of the few regulations that's had a noticeable impact on, I guess, criminal activity with guns, murders, things like that. It's actually been relatively effective. All the other stuff, like the 94 gun ban, hasn't done anything because that was just superficial features. But the training aspect is really important. I think there are some countries who do that. That's part of it. Part of your citizenship is military training, things like that. It's a part of it, and that actually would have a huge impact on your understanding of and safe handling of firearms, potentially even greater far-reaching effects in terms of your likelihood to commit a violent crime with a firearm too. Switzerland maybe might be a good example of that. Here, I'm going to stop sharing this since we don't need to do that anymore.
And the security of a free state, how is that interpreted as defense against the government? It sounds a lot more like defense against other nations, which in the
Well,
frame
yeah,
of
and it's
time makes
both.
sense.
It's both. And in the origin of this country, in the beginning, the states were actually seen as more or less sovereign under kind of the umbrella of the federal government. And this was actually a hotly debated subject, is whether the states were going to be sovereign or whether they were going to be part of the federal government. That's the whole federalist versus anti-federalist movement. Um, and but in this case, yeah, you're right. It is. I think it's, in general, it does actually mean two things. I can explain this. Security of a free state, as far as the whole country is concerned, if you were to say that, everybody being armed and trained and ready to fight is obviously going to provide a certain measure of defense for the entire country. But in order for the state itself, the state as a group of people, whether it's the individual states or the state as a federal agency, to remain free, then you need to have that ability to check the state if it ever gets too crazy. Like, what happens if a Hitler takes control of the government? I mean, the federal government as it stands today is very, very powerful. And what's to stop something like that from happening? And I mean, the people who created the system knew that, and they really, really were concerned about it. And so I think that's
why I think that one tiny sentence is just not enough. The Constitution as a whole needs to be a living document, and this thing should have been updated long ago. It should be updated constantly.
Well,
like,
it is that we have an
in my
amendment
opinion,
process.
like, if it's just left to be on its own devices and treated as a sacred text, it's basically just the next Bible.
Well, maybe. I mean, we do have the amendment process to update it, so it is
Which is
possible to change
horribly difficult.
by design. That's by design, because if it's too easy, then again the wrong forces could come in and do harm. And if we're going to update it, how and who decides?
Well, you see, I think it's going the other way. I think because it hasn't been updating, the government has used it to their advantage to get more power over the people.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely correct in that. That's definitely been a problem. In fact,
but
it's an ongoing
problem. Who would change it? Like, do you think the government that's got all this power is going to say, you know what, I don't want this much power anymore? No, of course not.
No, not at all. And you can vote for representatives, but that whole system has gotten very powerful too. So are they going to have your best interest in mind? I doubt it. But that's actually kind of points right back to the idea that the whole point of the Second Amendment, and honestly, they tie together with the First Amendment too. The idea that you can speak freely and you have force of arms to back up your speech if somebody ever threatens that. I mean, maybe not. It may not be perfect. Obviously, we have issues, and there's things that need to be worked on, and there are risks. Certainly, if everybody has a bunch of guns, some bad things can happen. But generally, they don't happen on the scale that you'd expect, considering how many guns there are. But it's certainly a something to consider, that the two, especially in my view, the First Amendment and the Second Amendment are kind of like key rights that really hold everything together, and they work together. In fact, I have a bumper sticker that I made that has an AR-15 drawing, and it says First Amendment insurance. That's kind of how I believe about that. That the two work together. I mean, yeah, you can have free speech, but if somebody tells you can't talk, what can you do? What, vote or complain? Like, well, if you have a bunch of guns, at least you got a fighting chance.
Getting pulled over by the police.
Huh?
That's called getting pulled over by the police.
Well, let's hope you're not the wrong skin color in that case.
Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah. It's a pretty deep topic. I mean, that even what we're talking about now probably has many, many, many layers, and we could keep on going there. um it
Yeah, the whole time kind of went toward the Second Amendment. It's there's a lot to talk about in that alone.
We'll we will definitely revisit this, I think, because
yeah,
again, like we could talk about this for hours and barely get through it. Yeah, you have any other ideas on let's see.
I mean, just real quick about like who should be changing the Constitution. I absolutely think it should be a popular vote. It should be up to all the people. Like I don't think there needs to be this complicated process that's basically left up to the whims of the government to decide.
No, you're right. And the thing is, if you have a situation, elected representatives, they wield a lot of power. And what does a huge, powerful system attract? Well, sociopaths and criminals and crooks. Like, it's not going to attract altruistic, nice people. But then think about it this way:
people, they get smeared hard.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask you a question. If it should be up to a popular vote, do you think that the majority of people are wise, intelligent people?
I don't know that really matters. I mean, it's scary.
Well, the majority rules.
Well, yeah, but who are you going to assign to determine who can and cannot vote? I mean, if you cross that line, you're getting into really scary territory. So
no. My point is, if you put it up to a popular vote and the majority rules, and the majority of people are ill-informed and maybe not well educated, what kind of results are you going to get?
Well, terrible, of course, but that's another topic altogether. Yes. Why I feel that not everybody should vote. Like, there's, in my opinion, you should only vote if you've done your research.
Yeah, but how do you ensure something like that? Well, wait. This is definitely a topic we have to discuss at a later date. We got to stick, because we started off with gun ownership and the Second Amendment. So definitely I'm gonna go back to that one, because that's actually really interesting. There's some great stuff right there. There is just so much in this particular topic. I mean, we basically open a can of worms right here with this. Yeah. I mean, I could think of 100 things right now that we could talk about, but it would just go on and on and on. And I don't think people want to listen to us ramble that long.
Yeah.
So let's see. Are there any other concerns that you have about that? About gun ownership, maybe? Let's just say not the Second Amendment, but maybe just gun ownership.
Nothing that wouldn't really like spark an even longer conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just, the thing is, I guess I'll just go back to the idea that I think staying alive is a human right, and being able to defend yourself is a human right, whether it be with your fists or a stick or a knife or a gun. I mean, whatever you go up against, the thing is, most people that you go up against in the modern world are going to probably come at you with a gun. So you wouldn't want to go to a gunfight with a knife.
Right.
So you, at least having a gun, and honestly, it's kind of the great equalizer. You take anybody, no matter how physically able they are or how capable they may be, and put them up against one or two or four people. Home invasions, people bust in the door, they come in, there's 3 or 4 people, and they take over the house and beat people up and take all their stuff, maybe kill them, rape them, whatever happens. I mean, if you don't have a gun, you're kind of dorked in that sort of situation. And even if you're somebody who's physically unable, maybe you're elderly or young or whatever, you have the ability to equalize yourself against the force. At least you have a fighting chance, let's say. Maybe not always equal, but at least you have an opportunity to balance yourself against this force. And it doesn't happen all the time. of course, people would be like, well, it doesn't really happen that often. And yeah, maybe not. But when it does, you might probably want it. That's why we have fire extinguishers and spare tires and stuff. Fires don't happen that often, but when they do, if you don't have a fire extinguisher, that's kind of it. And it's the same thing with guns. If you a handgun or a shotgun or whatever to defend your house with, even an AR-15 or an AK or something like that, a semi-auto, well, hell, I don't even know, maybe even a full-auto rifle, but that's a different topic. Whatever it might be that you need to defend yourself with, because the fact is most people are not trained. So you could say, well, why do you need a 30-round magazine, or why do you need, all this extra capacity and power? Well, because you're not trained, and it's the heat of the moment. Imagine this: it's 2 a.m. You're an 80-year-old lady. Bam! Somebody busts down the door. You hear a bunch of noise. There's a bunch of people in your house. They're coming after you. Whatever the situation might be. You're scared. Your heart's beating. Your adrenaline's going. You have no real formal training, but you have to defend yourself. Well, if you only had 6 shots and there's 4 guys or girls or whatever, what are your odds of hitting them? I mean, if you ever been shooting, it's totally not likely you're going to hit them in the dark when you're shaking and you're all amped up. So having 30 rounds balances that out.
I don't subscribe to the idea that we should take away all guns at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it makes sense to limit what kinds of guns there are. It only takes 1 bullet to slow, stop, or kill someone, and you don't even have to hit them to slow them down or scare them off. Well, and that's just, I mean, like, you can get away with a revolver or a shotgun or a rifle for home defense, self-defense. These things are small enough, practical enough to carry on your person when you're walking through a dark alley. You don't need machine guns. You don't need like giant rifles that look really cool, but like, for practicality purposes, I mean, basically what I'm trying to get at in a nutshell is that taking away some guns isn't taking away your guns. It isn't taking away your Second Amendment right at all.
Right.
It's, you still have, I mean, nobody seems pissed at all that it's illegal to have more than a 2.5-inch knife, which used to be 4 inches.
I'm pissed about it. What are you talking about? Am I a nobody?
But nobody's screaming about it. It's always guns, guns, guns.
Well, no,
it's always a slippery slope. Like, oh, you want to ban that gun? Well, now it's going to be all the guns. You're going to take away all the guns. That's not the case. I don't think there's very many people at all who are crying for all guns to be taken away.
There is something to be said for the slippery slope, and that's probably maybe a rabbit hole that we need to avoid. But that is a concern that people have. Now, you said nobody needs a particular thing. Well, I ask you, or say, nobody needs a Ferrari sports car. Nobody needs a Bugatti Veyron or something like that, but yet they exist, and we're okay with that, even though they're super powerful and super fast and super fun and expensive. No one needs it. Why can't you just have, I don't know, just a little Chevy Spark? Why doesn't everybody have those? Well, because it's fun. We should have things that are fun, as long as you're not hurting anybody. The fact is, having a tool doesn't make it automatically perform its action. Many, many people have guns. They have some crazy guns, like, 50 BMGs, like the Barrett rifle and stuff. People have tanks. They have machine guns and stuff, and they're not killing people with them. It's only when you actually perform an act that you should then be restricted. If you, or maybe if there's some real danger, like you are clearly crazy and murderous, right? Well, that's where I'm okay with restrictions. But if I'm not hurting anybody, I have no intent of harming anybody. Why shouldn't I have a machine gun or a tank or, some kind of missile or something, if I'm just doing it for fun and I'm not hurting anybody?
The thing about a Ferrari is that you're not, I mean, though you can kill someone with a car, typically that isn't the tool that most people use. And they certainly aren't using Ferraris to facilitate the ability to mow down more people at a time. Like that's just not how.
Well, that's not how most killings are. Not mass killings, mass shootings. That doesn't. It's like you're more likely to get hit by lightning than be engaged in a mass shooting. So that really isn't a thing. People don't buy those things to mow down a bunch of people. Well, okay, now there's some gang related stuff, but that's probably that's a completely different topic, and maybe goes into things involving the drug war and some other things like that. But in general, most people, they're killing one person, and most people who are murdered by somebody, they're murdered by somebody they know. So if you intend to kill 50 people, yeah, okay, maybe you might want some kind of crazy, belt-fed, electric-powered machine gun, but that doesn't happen. Most people are killed with knives and stuff like that, not guns.
Yeah, so, it's just harder work with a knife or strangulation or whatever other means you have to go homicidal on somebody. Now, background checks aren't going to weed out the people that have never gotten in trouble that are still just as crazy as the next mass shooter might be. But,
that's true.
Providing a tool that has a specific purpose for causing harm to some living being, whether it be hunting or war or gang shootings or robberies or whatever, or self-defense.
Yeah.
When you have a tool with that kind of power, it takes that element of the person who is, like, I'd say like 80% responsible, and that other 20% is like a huge facilitation towards pushing them over the edge to be like, oh, it'd be so easy if I just shoot them. Or
well, no,
because it's right here, crime of passion, like if you're, I've been in plenty of situations where I've been like, but I didn't have a gun on me, so it's probably good.
Well, you might not want to admit that publicly. No, that does, there's some validity to that, but that doesn't constitute the majority of situations. But
when you're talking about the potential for loss of human life, does the majority of a bad situation really, should that really be taken into such high regard? Because like, your chances of getting cancer aren't that great, really, but we still are spending a lot of money to try and beat it.
Well, no, that's a good point. Now, you'd mentioned okay, well, I'll kind of go back to something you'd said earlier that I'll respond to. The fact that a firearm is designed to kill is its defining feature. That doesn't mean that it's intended to kill. But the power to kill is what makes it able to defend. If it didn't have the ability to kill people, you wouldn't be able to defend yourself with it. You couldn't point it at somebody and make them back down. And in fact, there was a study done. I don't have the information in front of me, but I think it was commissioned by the CDC. I forgot what organization. I probably have it written down somewhere. National Academies Institute of Medicine was one of the organizations involved, but they concluded through, it's kind of a rather informal analysis, because obviously this information is rather difficult to obtain, but they concluded that there's at least several 100,000 defensive uses of firearms a year, potentially millions, but obviously being a scientific study, they couldn't really say for sure, but they kind of give a range. So it's pretty clear, I think, in that light, that firearms are not designed to kill, but they're designed to defend. But it's the fact that they can kill that gives them that capability. The fact that they are used to,
kind of splitting hairs, isn't it? Saying it's able to kill, but it's not intended to kill. What
use would it be if
an intention on a device, but the intention lies with the user?
Well, it does. But the thing is, if indeed that study is correct, that there's hundreds of thousands of defensive uses, that means that it's predominantly a defensive weapon, because there's only like 30,000 deaths from guns a year. Most of them are suicides. There's probably a lot of gang-related shootings, which I kind of think is a little bit different than just straight up murder. You know, turf wars and things like that are far different than somebody just offing a loved one, or a no longer loved one, let's say. You know, the suicide issue is probably its own topic for discussion, because that's really deep. That we can't possibly cover that right now. But the thing is, if a firearm weren't able to kill somebody, how could you stop an intruder? How could you make somebody go away? And in fact, most situations, and most gun owners that I know, they don't intend to kill people when they carry a gun or because they have guns. They know they can get people to back down. Simply presenting a firearm makes people go away, and nobody dies, and they live to live another day, and that's the hope, that you don't have to kill somebody. But if you had, say, like some kind of, instead of a gun, you have like a blender, or some little roller or something like that, like, what effectiveness would that be? You'd probably actually end up engaged in a fight at that point. But the fact that you have the ability to pull a trigger and kill somebody means that you can make them go away, and that even a large group of people can be made to go away at that point. And I think, this probably, we need to go back into this again, because there's obviously a lot more to it than that. I mean, obviously we have lots of, we've already brought up a lot of really interesting things that I'm sure are going to get people going. So we will be back again, no doubt.
Yeah, it's probably time to wrap up.
Yeah, I think that's just about all the time we have today for this particular topic, but we will be back for sure.
Absolutely. Like, feel free to comment, continue this discussion. We look forward to hearing what you have to say, and who knows, we might invite you on the show to talk about something if you tickle our brains just right. So
absolutely. And thanks for deep sink diving with us. All right, and have a great day.
Music we wrote.
Absolutely.